evening. Welcome to the show. I'm Sharri Marks, and we've got another big show coming up tonight. Penny Wong sends $46 million to the Palestinians and just asks the officials to make sure it doesn't go to terrorism. How naive can you be? Plus, how Britney Higgins is living it up in France after buying a chateau with your hard-earned money. And new details on Princess Kate's surgery, the latest live from London. But first tonight, to concerns, Australian taxpayer funds are being exploited to support terrorism against Israel. Anthony Albanese and Penny Wong have now committed a total of $46 million of your money to the Palestinians since the terror attacks began against Israel on October 7. Australia gave its first round of funding to Gaza on October 14, just a week after the October 7 unprovoked massacre. 1 week. And Penny Wong today told Palestinian Authority officials that the latest $21.5 million in funding must be managed carefully to make sure it wasn't misused by terrorists. And she said it's for civilian healthcare and childhood education.
This is an issue I raised with the Palestinian Authority, express my continued expectation about those funds being used appropriately. I expressed to them that it was extremely important, given the focus on this, that any funds Australia provides are used appropriately for the provision of the services that we are seeking to fund. And we wanted to make sure that there was appropriate transparency around that. And work with them to ensure that that is the case.
It's so ludicrous, it's almost funny. Can you imagine the Hamas officials? Oh, we've been building all of these tunnels, but because some official we've never heard of from Australia asked politely that the money not be used for terrorism, oh, well, we'll stop now. But then Shadow Home Affairs Minister James Paterson pointed out correctly that the people Penny Wong met with, the Palestinian Authority, have no governing role in Gaza and haven't for some 17 years. They can't possibly have any role in ensuring that the money Australia sends isn't exploited for terror.
The Foreign Minister has effectively conceded this overnight. She said in her press conference that she raised this issue with the President of the Palestinian Authority. The problem with that is that the Palestinian Authority has no authority in Gaza. It hasn't for almost 20 years after Ariel Sharon withdrew the IDF from Gaza in 2005 and Hamas used the opportunity to push the Palestinian Authority out. So I have no idea how the Palestinian Authority is able to assure that Australian taxpayers' money will not be misspent. And if that is Penny Wong's only plan to ensure Australian taxpayers' dollars doesn't end up inadvertently funding terrorism, then I think it's totally inadequate and she needs to revisit it.
Now, we've reported time and time again that there are concerns that international aid is being exploited and misused to support terrorism, including financing Gaza's network of 500 kilometres of underground tunnels and also weapons. Billions of dollars have gone to Palestinians in Gaza over the years. Billions. Even without any of the many investigations that have taken place showing aid money has been exploited for terror, it's obvious just from looking at what's before our very eyes in Gaza. Gaza could have been an international city with its own airport, given the amount of funds that has gone there, if there was a government that chose democracy. But instead of building schools and hospitals and other infrastructure, there's a seemingly never-ending supply of weapons to fire against Israel. There's a sophisticated underground tunnel network, and all the while, the Palestinians are impoverished and they live in third world conditions. It's why during this war, Hamas has had enough fuel to power rockets, but the hospitals can't operate their medical equipment. The media doesn't report any of this, of course. They simply show the poor conditions in the hospitals, and they blame Israel, they blame Jews for killing Palestinian babies, when the reality is far different. It's Hamas, the governing body in Gaza, taking with open arms the millions of dollars that countries like Australia blindly hand over. It's why it's actually irresponsible to continue giving funds to Gaza without proper protections for how it's being spent. Otherwise, your hard-earned money is likely to be contributing to terrorism, going to buy weapons to be used by killers. I revealed back in November that Australians have been donating tens of thousands of dollars to an aid organisation in Gaza that's been accused of funneling the money to a hardline Islamic terror group. But now there have been more revelations about UNRWA, the UN Agency for Palestinian Refugees. Well, the Geneva-based human rights group, United Nations Watch, has exposed that there's a Telegram group of around 3,000 UNRWA teachers in Gaza, and there's praise among them for the Hamas massacre on October 7. This is the organisation that has received part of the Australian taxpayer funding that Penny Wong has announced for Gaza, $6 million in the latest round. Now, the admin of this Telegram group is Safa Mohammed al-Najjar, and he's shared information about UNRWA to the group, including employee lists. On the 7th of October on social media, there was this praise for Hamas as holy warriors. Then another admin in the UNRWA group is a teacher called Abdallah Mehez, who called on Gaza citizens not to leave, not to evacuate the north of Gaza when Israel was begging civilians to get to safety in the south. As you know, Hamas's use of human shields is part of its military strategy, a strategy to win support in the West by increasing its death toll to win sympathy. Another UNRWA teacher celebrated the Hamas massacre of Israelis, saying on social media, "What we did exceeded expectations." And then this UNRWA teacher, Yasser, standing in front of his classroom blackboard, has said on social media, "How much I hate the Jews." Well, as the executive director of UN Watch, Hillel Nua, says, your tax money pays UNRWA teachers to incite Palestinian kids to murder Jews. And I could go on and on. There are many examples, but you get the picture. Now, the United Nations has said that it's now investigating these allegations.
On that report of UN Watch on UNRWA, I just asked to Human Rights Watch what they thought, an assessment of what they thought on that report, and they say they don't think is worth anything because they don't have proofs or things like that. Anyway, they didn't have anything good to say about the report. Yesterday, you said, I think if I heard well, you said that you are concerned. I mean, the UN is concerned.
I said what I said. I mean, neither of us can remember what I said yesterday, clearly, Stefano. But what I'm saying is that any allegations are looked into.
Will be looked into. Well, it seems like a half-hearted commitment to investigate. We'll follow up on that. But James Paterson, Shadow Home Affairs Minister, said the concerns about UNRWA are well known.
There are very well-documented concerns with UNRWA, including alleged siphoning of its funds by Hamas.
Well, I asked Penny Wong's office today if they will review sending taxpayer funds to UNRWA. A DFAT spokesman said in response that the United Nations Relief and Works Agency is the only organisation with a mandate to provide basic services to the Palestinian people, including food, shelter and emergency healthcare. As the Foreign Minister has said, we will continue to hold UNRWA accountable for its adherence to principles of tolerance, non-discrimination, equality and neutrality. Continue to hold them accountable. I don't think we've been holding them accountable at all, judging by their actions on and in the wake of October 7. But anyway, it does seem that Australian taxpayer funds, along with other international aid money, will continue to flow to an organisation where some of their employees very clearly support Hamas. But where else is all this aid money from the international community actually going? Well, apart from weapons and terrorist infrastructure, it's also lining the pockets of Hamas leadership. The New York Post reported that Hamas's top 3 leaders alone are worth $11 billion US, and they're reportedly living a life of luxury in Qatar and Turkey. The New York Post reports that Hamas runs an office in Qatar's capital, Doha, and its leaders, Ismail Haniyeh Musa Abu Marzak and Khaled Mashal maintain a luxurious lifestyle. They've been seen at its diplomatic club, photographed on private jets, and travelled widely. It really is the case that governments in the West, like Australia, like to ignore this inconvenient fact that Hamas leadership are living a life of luxury. And you have to ask, where are they getting the money from when Gaza is in such a dilapidated state? Well, an Israeli satirical show, Eretz Nehederet, did a skit on this. It's very funny, also quite depressing. Have a look.
My dog needs new Armani. Cause the sky is black, but Qatar is always sunny. Knocking on the door. It's the Mossad. Chill ya, baba. I just ordered sushi avocado.
You can look up the rest of it. And these Israeli skits have gone global because they accurately capture what's unfolding. The Australian newspaper's columnist Alan Howe writes that Gaza could have been like Singapore. He says, but the people of Gaza voted to be run by Hamas, a terrorist organisation not known for its economic ambitions. Instead of building upwards and outwards like Singapore, Hamas decided to build down. Colloquially known as the Metro, Gaza's hundreds of kilometres of deep tunnels are wide, illuminated, and house stockpiles of weapons, including rockets, an army of its soldiers, food and water stores, sick bays, and air-conditioned command centres. He says today they also hold dozens of kidnapped Israelis who we now know are being starved, tortured, and sexually assaulted. There needs to be more accountability about how funds, our funds, sent to Gaza are being spent. It's not good enough to blow $46 million of taxpayer funds and just hope that it ends up in the right hands. Now let's have a look at some of your other hard-earned dollars and how they're being spent. Well, Britney Higgins is sharing a glimpse at her new life in France, posting photographs of her 5-bedroom French chateau that was bought thanks to the $2.4 million taxpayer-funded handout awarded to her by the Albanese government. Higgins posted photographs with the caption, "We are our choices." She wrote that in French, showing her popping champagne for Christmas and enjoying Paris with her fiancé, David Sharma. Many Australians dealing with this cost of living crisis, I'm sure, would love to have a 5-bedroom chateau in France, not to mention the luxury of business class airfares, which journalist Samantha Maiden has reported that that's how Higgins and Sharma fly from time to time. I mean, most Australians can't even afford interstate economy tickets at the moment. Samantha Maiden writes that after she received $2.45 million settlement from the Commonwealth, there were trips to the Maldives, Paris, Geneva. Sometimes there were business class flights, and the pair are preparing to marry next year, which is now this year. The judge in the defamation case Bruce Lerman brought on against Network 10 has actually questioned whether there was any evidence of a cover-up by Linda Reynolds or the Morrison government. Yet this is why Higgins was awarded the $2.4 million by the Albanese government. The claims that she needed the compensation because she was treated poorly and may not be able to get an income for another 40 years. If Justice Michael Lee finds that there was no evidence of a cover-up or poor treatment, well, what of the money she's already received? What of the French chateau? Attorney General Mark Dreyfus and Finance Minister Katie Gallagher have been far from transparent in discussing why Higgins was paid this amount of money in a mediation process that deliberately excluded both Reynolds and Michaelia Cash from giving evidence. We are yet to hear any news of whether the new corruption agency is actually investigating this matter, the process of that multi-million-dollar payment. It's interesting to note also that according to Maiden's article, Sharma hasn't returned to full-time work in the past year. And then just last week, News reports told us that Shiraz had offered the producers at the TV show The Project the opportunity to film a leather couch in a Labor politician's office that was similar to the one his partner was allegedly raped on because he had contacts who, and I quote, owed him. Now, we're going to bring you in a moment our world news panel, and I'm going to get to President Joe Biden's insult of Trump voters. It seems a repeat of Hillary Clinton's deplorable mistake in a minute. But first, the Wall Street Journal has today revealed that a Chinese researcher in Beijing isolated and mapped the COVID-19 virus in December 2019, around 2 weeks before the deadly virus was made known to the rest of the world. So while China was still covering up the existence of this new coronavirus, a Chinese researcher in Beijing uploaded a nearly complete sequence of the virus's structure to a US database on December 28. Now, the documents disclosing this fact have been in the US government's possession all along, but it was only when Republicans on a congressional committee threatened to subpoena the US Department of Health and Human Services that they were reluctantly handed over to Congress. This lack of transparency is just as bad from US agencies as it is from China. And it makes you wonder yet again what motivation these agencies, some of them that were under Anthony Fauci's control, have to keep facts like this secret. Why the protection racket for China? And what's worse is that dangerous research into risky viruses is still happening in China. News broke this week that Chinese scientists are studying a mutant coronavirus strain that has a, and get this, 100% kill rate in mice. The scientists, who are linked to the Chinese military, cloned the virus from one that was found in pangolins in 2017. They've injected it into mice for research purposes, and they're using it on mice that have human-like cells, meaning they're effectively studying how this virus would transmit among humans. The same old dangerous research happening all over again. Okay, let's bring in our Thursday night world panel, National Senator Matt Canavan and Sky News contributor Kosha Gada. Wonderful to see both of you. Matt, firstly to this revelation that Chinese scientists are apparently working on a virus, a coronavirus, with a 100% fatality rate in mice. Isn't it time gain-of-function research has to be regulated around the world?
Well, I think you're right, Sharri. Obviously, there are a number of concerns with this story, or these bunch of stories really that have come out in the past week. I mean, the first concern is what you've highlighted there about the dangerous research that continues to occur in China with a shocking degree or lack of transparency. We're not shocked by the news that China hid this information, but it's still something that deserves condemnation. The second aspect of the story, though, is almost more concerning, and that is that authorities in the United States, in the Western world, have had this information and effectively hidden it from the rest of us. And the reason probably why they've hidden this information is some of this research, some types of this gain-of-function research, like that used in the humanised mice, is going on in Western countries. It's been going on here in Australia. I've uncovered through the Senate that there have been at least 14 different studies funded by taxpayers' dollars using gain-of-function research. We can't get all the information about those studies. The government refuses to provide them to the people. But this kind of dangerous research occurs all around the world. And now this week at the World Economic Forum, we've heard people talking about a disease X, whatever that means. There needs to be much greater transparency and oversight about what scientists are doing here, given the costs we just all went through of this last pandemic, which almost certainly now we can hazard a guess was because of a lab leak at a science laboratory.
Yeah, it's extraordinary. You know, the Albanese government loves to have reviews. They've got probably nearly as many reviews as the Rudd government had, reviews into everything. But this is the one topic that no politician in Australia seems prepared to look at. Kosha Gada, the Prime Minister, was just in Beijing the end of last year, met with President Xi, and did not raise the origin of the pandemic, a pandemic that we're still feeling the effects of, whether it's COVID that yet again is going around Australia, whether it's long COVID that people are suffering with, or vaccine injuries. Why can't our politicians globally actually have an international inquiry?
Such a good question, Sharon. You have been at the vanguard of this issue and like true investigative journalism going after that. So thank you so much for continuing to stay on this, because very few people are, and we need to know this. You know, I think there's a few dynamics in play. One is, as it relates to China, there is such a dependence right now, economically and otherwise, by all countries, but certainly by Australia. And so they just don't want to upset the apple cart. That's why I think you do see the smiling and shaking and of hands and niceties out there, and not that willingness to push it when, you know, 27% of our trade depends on China, and everything from vital supply chains to all the rest of it does. I think that's just the reality. Until we move the needle towards greater self-reliance economically, it's always going to be hard to push back on China on a whole range of issues. I think that's one thing. I think the other thing, too, is governments around the world did not exactly cover themselves in glory with the way they handled their public policy prescriptions in the wake of this pandemic. And so just anything they can do to sweep it under the rug and get people to move on and forget about it, I think allows them to absolve themselves of the horrible way in which they really conducted themselves and everything that they put us through with the blunt instrument approach, as opposed to something, you know, more focused and logical. That's probably coming into play as well.
Yeah, well, and on that note, of course, Albanese did eventually announce an inquiry, but the states aren't going to be held accountable, the states that kept everyone locked up for so long. Now, let's turn to the US presidential contest, and it seems Joe Biden has learnt nothing from Hillary Clinton's error in calling Trump supporters a basket of deplorables, because Biden seems to be choosing to villainize Republican voters as enemies of the state. Shortly after Donald Trump's win in the Iowa caucuses, Biden took to social media to say, "Looks like Donald Trump has just won Iowa. He's a clear frontrunner on the other side at this point, but here's the thing. This election was always going to be you and me versus extreme MAGA Republicans." And then Camala Harris seemed to follow up his comments today. Have a look.
I am scared as heck, which is why I'm traveling our country. So many of us know when we are scared for the future of our children, do we then stay in bed with the covers over our head?
Nope.
No.
Matt, are you more scared for the future of not just the US but the world if you had Kamala Harris as president or Donald Trump?
Well, I'll leave a decision for the leader of the free world, the leader of the United States, up to the people of the United States. But I've been very, very concerned with the politicisation, the weaponisation of the US judicial system going after political opponents. That is very sad, and I hope it's not a trend we follow here in Australia. But I mean, the basic principle here is, I suppose, in fairness to Joe Biden, in fairness to him, I doubt very much that he actually did tweet that. I reckon his staff probably did it. But regardless, it's in his name. And you know, the thing is, the more you attack your political opponents in this kind of over-the-top way, invariably the higher their poll results go. And that's what we've seen in the US. The more they go after Donald Trump through the court system, through this intemperate language about calling all of his supporters extremists, the higher his poll numbers and the higher his popularity seems to go. So, I don't know, maybe secretly they actually want Donald Trump to be president, because the way they're going about it, they're increasing the chances that he does achieve that every day.
Koshigata, I mean, it's not just that all of the cases against Trump have galvanised support for him, have turned him into a martyr. Adding to that, you've also got in the US a teetering economy, soaring food and gas prices, a border crisis, multiple international conflicts that aren't popular with many Americans. So do you think all of this, particularly the immigration scandal, is working in Trump's favour?
You've got it. I think those are the two dynamics. So one is he has become a martyr, and with each indictment, I mean, he jokes about it, but it's true, with each indictment, he goes up in the polls 5 points. The other is the record right now, just the reality on the ground, the porous border. You've got 8 million people or higher that have crossed over illegally under the current administration's tenure, and that takes the total number to about 30 million illegals in the country. The entire population of Australia is the equivalent of what is illegally in that country. You cannot govern a country in that way. and it's now showing up at people's doorsteps. So it's much more, there's a lag effect to it, but people can actually feel it in their day-to-day lives as they're getting bussed up and taking over schools and shelters and all of that. You've got generational inflation. You've got these three wars that are very much at the risk of escalating. Trump always mentions how, under his time there were none, and people see that and trust that. He's a mixed bag. He's not everybody's cup of tea, but I think the stylistic issues with him that people don't like feels very small ball when juxtaposed against this kind of backdrop that the incumbent has. And for all those reasons, I think you see why Trump right now is beating him in all the polls in the swing state. But there's still a year to go and a lot more twists and turns to come. So we can't really predict with any certainty how this will end up.
Matt Canavan, the Chinese ambassador to Australia, has accused Japan of being behind the sonar attack on our navies. I mean, he was also all smiles yesterday, having a laugh with our officials. But then he really said some things that were very critical of Australia, and he said he didn't expect us to in any way respect the political outcome of the elections in Taiwan. Let's have a quick look at his comments.
We're ready to compromise. We're ready to show flexibility on many issues, for example, in trade issues. But on the question of Taiwan, there's no room at all for us to show flexibility or to make compromise, because it involves China's sovereignty and territorial integrity. Because I noticed there are people in this country, I'm not talking about the government, I'm talking about the people. There are certain people in this country, or certain forces in this country who really have misunderstanding about the historical facts of Taiwan.
Matt, what did you make of his press conference, and also how the Albanese government is handling relations with China?
Well, what a normal relationship this is, Sharri. I mean, I've had to sit in the Senate the last year listening to Labor ministers say how normalised the relationship is between Australia and China, and apparently that's an example of it. But I think what really is telling from that is we're not going to be friends with China. They bully their own people, they bully other countries. Sure, I don't want to antagonise other nations, but the Labor Party have been on the wrong approach, trying to cosy up to a regime that's just a bully.
All right, Matt Canavan, Koshigata, thank you so much for your time. We're going to see you next Thursday because this is our new regular Thursday night World News panel. Now, coming up, find out how long Princess Kate will have to stay in hospital, that devastating news emerging overnight, and why won't Cricket Australia chairman Mike Bede speak out about the anti-Semitism row engulfing cricket? That's next. Welcome back. Well, just a week ago, former New South Wales Liberal Premier Mike Bede appeared in the Australian newspaper where he said this: "The biggest thing to me is political leaders that don't know what they know is right or what they believe in, and they aren't speaking out." So they don't do what they know is right or what they believe in. Critical of politicians in this day and age who don't speak out for what they believe in. And yet today, as the chairman of Cricket Australia, he's choosing to stay silent after Cricket South Africa sacked the captain of its under-19s team, David Teager, after he expressed support for Israel. Liberal Senator and former Australian Ambassador to Israel, David Sharma, joins me now. Welcome to the program. Now, Dave, we try to get a comment from Cricket Australia on this topic on Monday night, and in response, Crickets, pardon the pun. Now, you wrote to Mike Bede about this. Cricket South Africa said that they had to sack David Teager because they couldn't guarantee his safety because he's Jewish and supports Israel. But you, in your letter, wrote to Mike Bede and asked if this safety threat is true or whether it's just a ruse to sack a Jewish boy for political reasons. Look, we didn't hear back from Cricket Australia. Have you heard anything at all?
I haven't yet, Sharri. I know the letter has been received and I've been assured that it will be responded to and they're looking into it, and I take them at their word on that. But it is a very concerning issue, and I'm very glad you've highlighted it. I mean, this is a very talented young man, a South African citizen, a loyal South African citizen who's got the admiration of his teammates, who's been deprived of the captaincy, not the ability to play, but the captaincy for what Cricket South Africa cites as security reasons, but which they seemingly haven't shared, if there are indeed security concerns, with any other nation. Now, I've got concerns firstly for the Australian players, Jewish and non-Jewish, if there are security threats to the tournament, which South Africa is not sharing with us. But if those concerns are not indeed genuine, then I have concerns that cricket is being, corrupted by anti-Semitism in South Africa and politicised in a way that sport should never be politicised.
Yeah, and it's very concerning that we haven't heard a word from Cricket Australia on it. Now, let's return to our top story tonight. I spoke about this at the start of the show. Penny Wong giving in total $46.5 million to Palestinian territories and neighbours in the region. Overnight, she met with the Palestinian leadership, but they, by the way, have no control of Gaza, as you know. And she said she wanted to make sure that our funding wasn't going to be misused for terrorism. David Sharma, what do you think of all the international aid that's flowing into Gaza? Rockets, there's enough fuel for rockets. There's a never-ending supply of rockets that are being fired at Israel. Never-ending supply of weapons. Over the years, enough money to build 500 kilometres worth of tunnels. And yet Gaza is impoverished and there's not enough supplies or money for hospital equipment. So are you concerned that international aid money, including Australian taxpayer dollars, has been or is currently being exploited for terrorism?
I am concerned about how international assistance, which is meant to go towards the people of Gaza, has been hijacked and commandeered by Hamas. And that clearly has happened. I mean, there's no way that Hamas would have been able to build this extensive tunnel network that they've got. There's no way they would have been able to employ the number of people that they have in arms or under arms for them. There's no way they would have been able to manufacture rockets on the scale that they've got unless they subverted some of that aid. And look, I've got no problem. I'm supportive of more humanitarian assistance to the Palestinians, but if the end result is that it ends up in Hamas's pockets first, all we are doing with that assistance is prolonging this conflict or setting the stage for a further round of conflict because we're entrenching Hamas's grip on power. So I think before the international community rushes in and says, let's give more money, we need to be getting the governance right and we need to be putting in place mechanisms and people to make sure that the money we give, which is intended for the Palestinian people, actually reaches them.
Well, do you think there should be a pause on Australian taxpayer dollars at the moment, given we don't have a presence in Gaza?
Look, absolutely. I don't think we should be giving any more money to the UNRWA, the UN Relief and Works Agency, because there is credible allegations that their own aid has been diverted and credible allegations that some of the curriculum taught in UNRWA schools, some of the hospitals used by UNRWA have been misused by Hamas or commandeered by Hamas. And look, Gaza is largely governless now. I mean, Hamas is still the de facto authority, but obviously they're not running the place. I mean, the simplest way to provide humanitarian assistance is to, fund organisations like the Red Cross that are literally trucking in food and water and essential medical supplies, which has a small chance. It can still be misused by Hamas. Undoubtedly, it will end up feeding and clothing and watering Hamas, but I think that's a price worth paying. But anything beyond addressing the immediate humanitarian concerns and certainly the millions of dollars the government's announced, I think we really need to wait until we have some sort of political horizon for the resolution of this conflict before we start writing cheques of that size.
Yeah. And you know the region better than most, having been the Australian ambassador to Israel. Now, Labor Industry Minister Ed Husic has said that anti-Israel voices are wrongly being threatened with losing their job. He was asked about the ABC staffers' revolt over the sacking of anti-Israel radio fill-in host Antoinette Lattouf. She was only meant to be there for a 5-day contract. She was there for 3 days, just 2 days she didn't fulfil, and she was still paid for it. But Ed Husic said people who speak their mind shouldn't be sacked for it. Here's what he had to say.
One of the things we value about a democracy is the ability for us to express our opinion and what we think should happen. And people shouldn't feel like if they express their views that in some way, shape or form that there's some sort of, if it's been peaceful and if it conforms to what we think is acceptable in a democratic country, they shouldn't feel like their jobs are on the line as a result of it.
Dave, I mean, of course, political freedom and freedom of speech is important, but if you're working at the ABC, there's clear impartiality rules. I mean, it's in their charter. So why should taxpayers fund voices who are going to spread content that Jews find offensive?
Look, I absolutely agree. I mean, this is a matter about adherence to the ABC Code of Conduct and the ABC's own social media guidelines. Now, you know, I'm sure if this presenter on her private social media channels was calling for Ed Husic to be sacked, you wouldn't hear Ed Husic being so supportive of the right to free expression in a workplace, or if they were uttering anti-Labor slogans. The point is that we shouldn't be picking and choosing the content that journalists are and aren't allowed to express on their social media channels. We should demanding they all adhere to the ABC's guidelines, which is designed to ensure that our publicly funded broadcaster is a source of impartial information, and we can trust the journalists who are presenting us with the news and not running a political agenda. Now, this journalist clearly, with her private social media postings, which were visible to the public, had a political agenda that she was prosecuting, and that has no place in the national broadcaster, regardless of what the content of that was.
All right, Dave Sharma, thank you so much for your time tonight. Really appreciate it. Now, coming up, how Britney Higgins is spending your hard-earned money, living it up in France, and whether there's any recourse for that money to be returned. Plus, Chris Minns, New South Wales Premier, goes soft on drugs. Are dealers been given the green light? Stay tuned. Welcome back. All right, well, let's bring in tonight's panel, Sky News host Danica DiGiorgio. It's also the birthday girl, and you're celebrating your birthday with us here.
Where else would I want to be? Exactly. It's good to be here.
And commentator Jason Morrison, great to see you.
It's been wild backstage as we've celebrated the birthday. I mean, you know, happy birthday. I've just heard about it.
Thank you so much.
Yeah.
Now, let's return to our top story. One of our top stories tonight, Britney Higgins is sharing a glimpse at her new life in France, posting photographs of her 5-bedroom French chateau, bought thanks to the $2.4 million taxpayer-funded payout that was awarded to her by the Albanese government. Jason, Britney Higgins keeps saying she wants privacy, but then she posts these photographs knowing that the media are going to pick it up and report on it.
I know.
Did she actually want privacy, or is she courting the media here?
Is she right? I don't know. Look,
missing the publicity.
Remember the Harry and Markle worldwide privacy tour?
Yes.
This is the worldwide privacy tour. Respect our privacy. Yeah. We want privacy. Here's some more photographs. I get a sense we're lining up for, this is the coded way of saying to the mags, look, we wouldn't mind a shoot, you know, a bit of an earn here. It's sick stuff, because there's a bit of me that sort of feels sorry for her, not him, because I think he's the game player here. He's the guy that seems to be, I don't know, somewhat enjoying this in a weird way. And I feel bad for her that she's in a corner she can't get out of now. And you've got someone who seems to think they know how to play the game, running the shot. I think it's rotten. And the worst thing about it is, you know, it is public money, and
well, that's the point. And that's the point, right? The Albanese government, Danica, refused to say how much money she'd been paid. It came out in this most recent defamation case that it was $2.4 million.
Extraordinary.
And I just think people would be so angry that in this cost of living crisis, she's flying around in business class airfares from time to time, and she has a 5-bedroom French chateau. Should the corruption agency be investigating this payout?
Absolutely, because the payout doesn't make any sense, Sharri. All we've heard from the federal government that it was for a harm cause, it was for the fact that she won't be able to find employment for something like 40 years, for her medical bills, but we don't really know the answers. And this is why we need a proper inquiry to get to the bottom of it, because all we're seeing is these two swanning about now on cobblestone alleyways, they're eating French cuisine, popping their French champagne, and all on our bill. We're the ones that have actually funded this, and what for? There was no conviction. That trial was abandoned, and I think you've nailed it. They are the Harry and Meghan of Australia. They want privacy, but they don't want privacy. We're sick of seeing them.
And not only that, of course, Linda Reynolds and Michaela Cash were blocked apparently from receiving the legal aid to give evidence during the mediation process. So Mike Dreyfus and his crew only wanted one side of the story.
Well, the new ICAC, if it doesn't investigate it, it looks a joke. if it's not its starting point. And it might not just start straight away, but if it doesn't look at it, it looks farcical because most people have got a bit of a what about this. They kind of have a feeling that something's not right. And when something's not right, that makes you kind of question whether it's upright. And there's a lot in this that isn't.
All right, let's turn to this story. New South Wales is the latest state to go soft on drugs. New South Wales Premier Chris Minns did an exclusive interview with the Daily Telegraph today where he announced that people caught with small amounts of hard drugs, even ice, would be spared court and criminal convictions from the end of February. And instead, there'll be a two-strike system where you might be fined $400, but you miss the fine if you do a drug course. Danica, this is just the latest state to decriminalise hard drugs. And I just can't understand why this is happening because everyone seems to have forgotten the 15-year-old Anna Wood who died of ecstasy at a party. Why are we decriminalising hard drugs and what message does that send young teenagers?
Well, it just means that they just feel like they can go and take drugs knowing that they're probably not going to get a criminal conviction in the event that they are caught. Now, look, we're seeing this argument a lot at the moment, Sharri, because now pill testing, of course, has come back in. The Greens are pushing for it because of a number of overdoses at festivals over the summer. But what it does is it's appealing to a younger cohort. They're the ones that want this policy implemented because this is what they essentially want. My issue with it is that it gives them a false sense of security, that they're going to be able to take these drugs. They're probably not going to get caught, but if they do get caught, they're not going to get that criminal conviction. But then it's the consequences of it, the tragedies. As you mentioned, there's been so many deaths, overdoses over the summer time. And that's the issue here. We need an education campaign to tell people about the dangers of drugs, not encouraging them to take it in the first place.
Yeah, I just feel like it should be the opposite route that's taken. You should be having harsher penalties to deter teenagers because it can destroy your life. If young kids get addicted, their life is over. I mean, you know, not only if they overdose and die, but an addiction can seriously derail someone, not to mention cause brain damage.
Well, I'm glad you mentioned Anna Wood, you know, the forgotten victim in an era when we used to actually look and say, this stuff can kill kids. And there was a generation of kids that grew up around the Anna Wood message because of her remarkable parents, Tony and Angela, I think went around school to school to school, basically gave up their lives to spread the message. This stuff can kill.
And our governments are undoing it.
And that's right, they're a buck each way on it. And look, the farce of it here is, I don't think there's anyone tonight, you know, lighting up their bongs or snorting their coke or whatever they do. I don't think anyone there sits in fear of the justice system because the common result of a judicial response to someone charged with a possession in New South Wales is a Section 10. It's like, oh, look, get off the stuff, go and see a counsellor. Nothing will change out of this. This is what governments do when they want to really say, we don't mind this anymore, but they know that they have to be able to electorally say they're still tough on it. So they've got a double message. And, you know, Anna would be in her early 40s today if she hadn't have taken ecstasy on that night. And, you know, and her remarkable parents, Tony, who's still alive, and he
Maybe
probably...
I should get him on the show next week.
He'd be one to talk to about this.
To speak what he thinks about this. And overall, you know, the picture that we're getting, particularly New South Wales government, but it's the same in Victoria as well, is no action on the hate preachers, no action on drug taking. It's just getting very soft.
We push the important stuff aside all the time. All the important stuff aside.
Now let's have a look at the housing news that we've had both for New South Wales and nationally today. The Australian newspaper reported that construction bosses are warning the Albanese government is not on track to achieve its target of building 1.2 million homes in 5 years. New South Wales Premier Chris Minns in that interview also said there's no chance of building 75,000 homes this year. Victoria's made similar promises. I mean, Danica, we're in a housing crisis. What's going on?
Well, exactly what is going on. We just feel like we're in this rat race over and over again. There's been a housing crisis for how long, and governments don't seem to be doing anything about it. I mean, look here in New South Wales. Chris Minns promised 75,000 new homes. Today he says that he's not going to be able to deliver that. There's about a 28% decline on builds year on year here in New South Wales. Albanese can't even deliver on his promises. And we, the Australian people, are just supposed to, try and find a home? I mean, you've seen the lines, the rental queues. It is impossible out there. But I also think half of the battle and half of the problem is the immigration rate that we've seen in the last 12 months in Australia. And I believe that that's contributed to the problem, and that lies directly with Anthony Albanese. And we're just in this crisis, but no government is prepared to do anything about it.
Danica DiGiorgio, Jason Morrison, great to see you both.
Thanks,
Have
Sharri.
a good rest of your birthday. Now, after the break, we'll cross live to London for the very latest on Princess Kate's surgery and why the King is heading to hospital too. That after the break. Well, the Princess of Wales is currently in hospital after undergoing planned abdominal surgery. And King Charles will go to hospital next week for treatment for an enlarged prostate. For the latest, let's bring in the Daily Mirror royal editor, Russell Myers, live in London. Russell, thanks for your time. Look, what do we know of Princess Kate's health condition?
Well, good evening, Sharri. Well, that sort of information was dripping out yesterday. A bombshell statement, first of all, from Kensington Palace, and then followed, as you rightly said, by another one from Buckingham Palace about the King and his prostate exam next week. But first of all, Princess Kate is in hospital where she'll stay for the next 10 to 14 days. And we're told it was planned abdominal surgery. She will have a 3-month recovery, which does seem like an awful long period of time. She's cancelled engagements. Everything has been sort of wiped off the slate for the next few weeks and months. No foreign tours, especially for her and for William for the current period. But I'm told she's doing okay at the moment. So, sending her our best wishes.
Yeah, and I'm sure more details will emerge at some point in the next few days. Now, just days into his reign, the Danish monarch King Frederik has released an unexpected autobiography, and it praises his Australian wife, Queen Mary, this after rumours have been swirling of an extramarital affair. What can you tell us about this new book?
Well, very interesting. The abdication of Queen Margrethe, who came completely out of the blue on New Year's Eve during her address to the nation. I don't think anybody was expecting it, but her stepping down after 52 years on the throne. And certainly eyebrows raised at the timing of it, because there had been these rumours circulating over the past few months of an affair that the Crown Prince Frederik, as he was then, was engaged with a Mexican socialite, Genevieve Casanova. But this new book is sort of celebrating his sort of new found, I suppose, stardom. He's now in the top job with Queen Mary by his side. Certainly he is sort of riding on the crest of a wave of her popularity, because she has been absolutely endeared from the Danish public's point of view. They've absolutely adored her. The fact that she's ingratiated herself with the population, learned the language, accepted the royal duties and all the charitable endeavours that have been thrown at her. And I think that the book is sort of an ode to her, and the fact that she's willing to take this sort of leap of faith with him. And look at their popularity standings at the moment. It's about 80-90%. So I think they must be doing something right.
Yeah, I guess people don't hold it against him that he's been off gallivanting with Ms. Casanova. Now, very quickly before you go, I want to turn to these revelations in yet another book that the late Queen Elizabeth was furious that Harry and Meghan named their daughter after her. Do you think this rings true?
Well, it's interesting. I mean, Harry and Meghan choosing to name their daughter Lilibet, it caused a bit of a stir at the time, and it's causing a bit of a stir now. I mean, Harry and Meghan can't really do anything right over the other side of the pond at the best of times. So one may feel sorry for them at some instances. And I think that, if you're getting het up about a baby name, then something's gone wrong in your life, I think. I don't think the Queen would have been that angry about it at the time. So possibly a bit of, sticks and stones. But, one for the book.
Sure, you'd be happy that your name lives on. Russell Myers,
Precisely.
Thank you very much for your time. Now, we're out of time. I'm going to see you at 8 o'clock on Monday. But right now, the man of the hour, Paul Murray.